What is up, basketball fans? I am Jason Burgos for Sportsnaut.com, and I have the pleasure of being joined by one of the best NBA reporters in the business today. He is the senior NBA reporter for Yahoo Sports, and along with talking the league, he will also get into some conversation about his book, Built to Lose, how the NBA's tanking era changed the league forever. And that man I speak of is the one and only Jake Fisher. Jake, thanks so much for the time today.
Very kind introduction. Thank you for having me. That was great. What's up? How are you?
I'm fantastic. Always like talking to you. A bunch of questions. Of course, let's get into the book because this is a fascinating topic that you're writing about, and it's interesting. It came out a bit ago. It can be found on Amazon on a lot of platforms as well. So let's talk about it. It's fascinating because it goes into depth on team building through tanking. When researching for the book and speaking to team execs, staff, players, and agents, how difficult was it to get the various opinions on something like this, which can kind of be a divisive topic, or was there resistance from people talking about it, or were people willing to spill the beans because you've developed trust inside the industry?
Yeah, I ended up compiling over 300 interviews for that book, and it really does focus on. I was just talking to someone about this last week when I was away at this event down at Tulane, the pro basketball negotiation competition where a lot of executives from around the league come through. And Ben Falk, who used to be part of the Sixers front office under Sam Hinkie, he talked about it as being like this culture war, this moment where Hinkie and Pete D'Alessandro in Sacramento and Rob Hennigan in Orlando and Ryan McDonough in Phoenix, and all these analytical-minded executives started rising to the top of these organizations. And there's been a clear computation around the league that, like, to win a title, you need a top 5 player, probably 2. And the easiest path for any team to get them is in the top of the draft. So it really was a deep dive of all these stories from 2013 to 2016 that kind of compare and contrast Philly's rebuild with, Boston. Remember, they traded KG and Paul Pierce to Brooklyn the same night of the 2013 NBA draft that Sam Hinkie traded Drew Holiday to New Orleans for the injured Nerlens Noel. So there's a lot of detail from all those teams and the players and the coaches about trade talk and, come draft time, a lot of negotiations about secret pre-draft workouts and stuff like that. So if you're an NBA fan who loves real behind-the-scenes stuff and loves the draft and loves that team-building idea, there's a lot of detailed information for you there.
Now, going to the point about the different executives and those perspectives, when going through these interviews and talking to all these different people, is that because is that kind of like a paradigm shift, like a change where is it a common thinking and a lot of executives throughout the league, because they're from, I guess, the new breed, the new generation, are thinking like that? Or when you're talking to people and getting opinions, are there still some out there that maybe are or maybe old school or just have a different approach and they don't believe in this idea of tanking to become a title contender?
I think there are certain ownership factions that say, well, I don't know if we can survive 3 years of being bad and our fans not really wanting to come show up and see a losing product. And that's different in certain markets. Like Brooklyn, for example, they have to operate something very different from all teams. Just like OKC has their own different thing, just like Miami has their own different thing. The Nets are in a major market that has no long-standing relationship with the city, and so they don't necessarily have. I don't know if the Nets could really survive a 3 to 5 year tanking effort, and I think that's definitely influencing part of why they're holding on to Mikal Bridges and trying to move things forward, and they let go of Jacque Vaughn in the first year of a 4-year contract extension because they were losing games. So I do think overall the smart people at the end of the day have kind of won out on this debate, and that if you can stomach it in your pocketbook, if you can bottom out year after year after year, you can look at the Thunder even, who didn't necessarily have like the worst record. I believe their top pick in all this stretch was the number 2 pick that became Chet Holmgren. They trade Paul George to the Clippers. They get back Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, who was not a top pick, but then behind him they've been able to slowly add a lot of these guys. Jalen Williams and Chet Holmgren in the lottery, Casey Wallace in the lottery, and Josh Giddey was a number 6 pick. So slowly but surely they've built what looks like to be a real perennial playoff contender, and pretty much all of these guys they either acquired in that Paul George trade or they got with picks from that Paul George trade that ended up being really, really valuable.
Jake, I will disagree with you on the Nets. Can't survive losing. No one here in New York cares about the Nets. They won't even notice. They can just lose for 10 years. It's okay. Do what you got to do, Nets.
Yeah.
But after talking to hundreds of people inside the industry about this topic, what was kind of the lasting opinion for you? What was your takeaway? Did it change what you felt about this topic going into it, or you kind of on board with this already?
I think the biggest thing I've learned and taken away that I still apply to how I look at the league right now is that building a championship team is really, really hard, and your starting point is certainly important. And I think that depending on what your route you take, it really needs to, trading away KG and Paul Pierce, for example, is very different than trading Drew Holiday. And I think the amount of return you get, whether it's you send out a guy or he leaves you in free agency or whatever, that opening starting point, I think, has a real just overall impact on where things go. But also, there's just so much luck involved. There's luck, let alone to get the number one pick, right, with the draft lottery. There's injury stuff. There's, these two players just don't get along. There's something that happens behind the scenes, and a lot of it just comes down to a tweak of an ankle or the head coach that you hired and that player not getting along. It is so hard to do it, and that's why I do believe that taking year after year to throw a lot of darts at the dartboard. I was talking to someone today who was saying there's this talk about, should the Hornets pick LaMelo Ball or Brandon Miller? Well, why not pick both? Because they're both so young. You never know what's going to happen. Look at LaMelo's brother Lonzo, who was leading the number one offense in Chicago, and the number one team in the Eastern Conference, at least in Chicago, as of January 22, and then hasn't played a game ever since. So this stuff is so fickle, and I think the best chances you can give yourself to overcome those odds with more picks, more players, and more patience, I think, does go a long way.
So let's talk news around the league. First, perfect time. You mentioned the Celtics, stuff like that. They really are building a big lead in the East. Honestly, a big lead in the whole entire NBA. This is a very balanced team. They can score if they got to score. They can play some good defense. They got to play some good defense. Is this the best team of this Tatum and Brown era? And if there is one weakness or one team that could give them trouble in the playoffs, what is it or who is it?
Yeah, I think adding Kristaps Porzingis and Drew Holiday were pretty incredible moves for a team that already made the finals 2 years ago and came within a whisper of making it this past year. And Porzingis has truly elevated their defense with his rim protection and the three-point shooting he provides on the other side. The spacing has just been really, really elemental to what they're trying to do, to give Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown a lot of room to operate. And, the other guys behind them are all coming along as well. Sam Hauser has turned into a real legitimate rotation player in this league. I think they're far and away the favorite in the East. The one team in the conference that I do think could give them some trouble if they're healthy. If Joel Embiid comes back, I do think the Sixers had been putting together what was a real viable championship contender out of the Eastern Conference. With as good as Porzingis is, he still doesn't have the size to handle Embiid on a night-to-night basis, and I wonder how much Joel could kind of neutralize that advantage. And now they've added Buddy Hield to be a real sharpshooter who's played really well. He's fit in great from everything I've heard. So, Milwaukee, I think, is a little bit, I don't know. It's just there's so much at stake there, and it feels so pressurized. To overcome the Adrian Griffin firing and all this. I'm not saying that I think they don't have a chance, but it would just be, to me, it seems. And again, if Joel's healthy and back and whatever, it's a whole different conversation compared to, where the Sixers stand now. But the Bucks they've given me a lot of cause for concern.
See, this is why you're expert. You perfectly transitioned. You sent me in the direction I was going because I was going to ask about the 76ers. But the Knicks, my Knicks, and the 76ers were two of the best teams in the East for much of the season. Obviously, the injuries came up. A lot of injuries to key players. It's kind of started to take a toll a little bit. But of those two teams, which has the better chance when they get their key guys or the guy for the 76ers back? Really, you mentioned the Sixers. Is the Sixers, that's the team? They get Embiid back, they can go to finals? Or considering how well the Knicks are playing, and if they can get Mitchell Robinson back with this group where they had Anunoby, that was so good, could they really be finals contenders and maybe give the Celtics a run?
Yeah, the Knicks, when healthy, will be right up there with everybody else as well. I just think Joel, what he was doing, he was the real, like, unquestioned MVP to me, and just won it. The Knicks don't necessarily have someone of that magnitude on the roster, but I think like their second, like their next group of guys, I do feel like probably does outweigh Philly. Like right now, I think I would take
Yeah.
Jalen Brunson over Tyrese Maxey. Excuse me. I think I would take OG Anunoby over Tobias Harris, for example. And they've got obviously Randall when he comes back. If he comes back, he's a different type of player unto himself. You've got just a long. I mean, the Bogdanovich, Alec Burks addition at the deadline. I think New York does have like a stronger 2 through 10, if you will, than Philly has, and that's going to be something that I think really allows them to play matchups and stuff beneficially.
Because you have such insight and know so many people, so many, have all these whispers in the league. Like the Knicks, what I like about what they've done is they've, in a way, follow sort of like the Mavericks mold, in that you had your one star, and they've kind of really, like, this is one of the deepest teams in the league. You got a Bohan Bogdanovich that might be on the bench. This is a really good deep team if they're healthy. Is that something you think like other GMs and because with the new CBA, it's going to be harder to have these big threes, even big twos going to be harder to do. Are teams maybe looking at the Knicks and seeing what they did and say, man, they just made a deep team and they found the star. Maybe if they go far, can reach the finals, people might copy that idea.
It's an interesting thought. The one pushback I'll give is that New York themselves, I think they're happy with what they put together right now, but I do think that they would prefer to package some of those pieces together this summer and go after a Joel Embiid or a Giannis Antetokounmpo or whoever becomes available. So I think it's a good recipe to get to this level now and to get from out of the play-in muck to hosting a playoff series to like really establishing yourself as a conference finals threat. But yeah, I think still the conventional wisdom would be that New York is looking for a player who can maybe even be above Jalen Brunson on their pecking order to take, kind of like the Jamal Murray to Nikola Jokic. If you swapped Brunson and Murray with Denver, that type of situation, but back in the Garden.
So many teams have a great first half, but then when the dog days of the season come, they fall to reality. However, for the Timberwolves and Thunder, the reality is these are two good teams. They are very talented, but which team really has a chance to maybe get by the Nuggets, get by the Clippers, really make some noise, possibly get to the finals of those two mostly young teams?
I'm gonna say the Timberwolves, just being that they've got some veteran know-how with Mike Conley and Rudy Gobert. And I think Monty Morris is going to be very helpful in their biggest gaps of fouling the ball and keeping turnovers down. I really believe I believe in both coaching staffs, to be honest. I think they're two of the best in the league. And I think ultimately just that size and that defense that has been Minnesota's calling card all year long, that's going to translate no matter what. If the shots aren't falling, if there's certain matchups that don't work out, I think that defense is going to travel. And you look back to last year, the 4-1 series loss to Denver kind of was over in the blink of an eye. But if you really watch those games, the Timberwolves kind of gave Denver as big a fight as anybody in the first round. Yep. And I do think that was part of the momentum that they had moving forward into this summer that set the backdrop for them to have this great season so far.
Because they've been so bad, they're probably heading to the lottery again. I feel like as much as it can happen, like Victor Wembanyama is still kind of flying under the radar because he's really been unbelievable. This dude's breaking like rookie records every week. The hype was how he's the biggest prospect since LeBron. Based off of what you see now that we've seen almost a full season of him, people you maybe talk to, is there a case that can now be made that not is he just the best prospect since LeBron, he has the potential to have an even bigger impact on the game than LeBron?
I think so, just being that he can literally physically impact more of the court than LeBron can at all times. It's some of the stuff he's capable of doing, like he can stand under the rim and block shots on both sides. So
yeah,
it's just, we saw it last night against Minnesota where Monty Morris had one miss on one side, he got it back, and typically, you can use the rim as protection. That's like a thing that kids get taught by skill trainers, like down to fifth grade, and it's something that you still learn at this level. Like you get into the paint and you can use the rim to protect the ball. Victor Wembanyama seems to be someone who can just come sneak an arm around the rim himself and poke it out free. So it is crazy. There's still got a lot of room to grow there for San Antonio as a team, for him in particular as an individual. But yeah, I'd say the early returns are pretty striking. What he's been being able to do, especially on a team that doesn't really have much punch behind him.
If the Phoenix Suns don't go far in the playoffs and they shockingly were maybe knocked out early, is there a chance that this group could maybe be broken up? Would they ponder moving Durant or Beal? I don't know who would want Beal at this point with all the injuries. Or no matter what happens, there's too much of a financial investment, especially with this new ownership. They're at least going to give him another season.
Yeah, I think the talk around Phoenix is that in that event there might be more repercussions on the personnel staffing stuff. Front office, coaching staff, who's to say? And I know they just came in and gave Frank Vogel a lot of money, but there's definitely talk of the stakes being so high in Phoenix and what happens if they were to lose in the first round type thing. But I personally am not necessarily looking at it as if they don't go far, Kevin Durant's going to be for the taking. Maybe anything can happen. He could just decide, look, this ain't working out. I just wrote a story today. I talked to Kevin a couple weeks ago in Atlanta about how he's playing the best defense of his career right now at 35 while still putting up the most efficient three-point shooting of his career too. It's remarkable what he's capable of doing right now. So maybe he does look and say, all right, I'm still doing this, but I'm 35. Who knows how much longer I have left? I want to go do it here instead. It's possible, but that's not something I'm really looking towards right now.
What's your read on the Atlanta Hawks situation? I mean, first it seemed like, okay, Trey, I don't know if Trey works for us. Maybe Trey goes. Then, I don't know, it's on John Tamer. Maybe he doesn't work for us. Now it's back to, maybe Trey doesn't work for us. Like, is this team just an out-and-out mess? Like, what is your read? Like, where are they going to go this summer with this stuff?
I think a lot is just going to be determined, as we saw at the trade deadline, on what the price points are going to be out there for Atlanta's guys. Like, if they could end up getting the moon and the stars from the Lakers for Trae Young, they might have to consider that and build around DeJounte. And I think the only real critical, established foundational piece of Atlanta that's moving forward from here on out is Jalen Johnson. He, the third-year forward at Duke, fell to the 20th pick in the 2021 NBA draft. He was a top 10, top 12 prospect going into college. He had some struggles there, but he's really turned the corner, and this dude looks like a perennial all-star right now. So he kind of seems to be the North Star of what that team is building around.
Is that kind of like the problem with Atlanta a little bit? Mentioning, okay, if the Lakers give up the moon and the stars for Trey, it seems like teams are not willing to do that. Like DeJounte, there's some issues and people have with him and rumors and rumblings about him in the league, and then Trey, he's got his weaknesses, great scorer, but there's issues. Is that the thing? Are they maybe overvaluing both of them and wanting too much, and that may end up just forcing them to have to keep them because they value them so high, and other teams don't?
I don't know if it's that. I think it also only takes one, right? Like the Sixers weren't getting 3 first-round picks for anyone for James Harden besides the Clippers this summer or this fall, and they got it. So I think if the Lakers are willing to put 3 firsts and Austin Reeves and this and that and whatever on the table come this summer, and that's the best offer the Hawks have, I think they would have to consider that if that's for DeJounte or for Trey. So, it's also a lot of teams get access to more picks during a lot of teams had their 2024 pick frozen at this trade deadline essentially because of stepping rules and whatnot. And the second that the draft becomes part of it, you get access to more draft capital and more future picks too. So teams like the Lakers can trade 3 picks this summer that couldn't have traded. They could only trade 1. Like the Bucks couldn't trade a first-round pick this summer, or this trade deadline, for example, but they will have access to future draft capital come June and July. So I think the summer is just generally a better opportunity for those bigger type of deals, especially being that teams in the offseason can carry 20 roster spots. So it makes salary matching a lot easier as well.
All right, last question is kind of just general, big picture, off-season kind of thing. Give me, from what you feel, maybe what you're hearing, 2 star players that actually good chance they are moved in the offseason? And then what team do you feel might be surprising in that they're really active in the trade market and free agency? Like the Pistons jump out to me as a team that might be.
I think the Pistons are going to try to be more active on the free agency side of things because they have around $60 million in cap space they can play with.
Yeah.
A lot is just going to be at stake, like you were talking about Phoenix, depending on how things go at the end, in the first round and in the playoffs. A lot of it's going to be dependent on, sour taste in teams' mouths and how people are feeling as they walk out of that arena. So, it's hard to predict right now, aside from, the two players we talked about in Atlanta. And one thing I'll say that I've said before is that Kawhi signed his extension with the Clippers, 3 years, $153 million, or in that ballpark, and said on the record at his locker, I'm of the mind that Paul George is coming next. That's been a long time since that happened. So until we see a Paul George extension with the Clippers, you're going to have teams like Philadelphia and Golden State and maybe even Indiana, where Paul started his career. Now they've got a fun thing going with Tyrese Halliburton and Pascal Siakam. You're going to see plenty of teams hoping and waiting out. I mean, even the Knicks, that Paul George is going to be someone that they could sign on the open market this summer or get him in some type of sign and trade deal.